Good morning, Amy. Here's the write-up of the question you had sent me by email. Now, of course, you're not wrong, and of course, the error that you're seeing was in the software, apparently. So let's take a look. This was the simplex table that you had started to have your question at. Once you have this, you're supposed to be pivoting, and of course the way we pick the pivot is we look for the pivot column by the most negative entry in the bottom row, sorry. So here's our pivot column, the x2 column, and within that column we look for the smallest positive ratio of this term divided by this term. So 40 over 1 gives us 40. 2 divided by a half gives us 4. There's your smallest positive ratio, so this is your pivot row, and that means we're going to pivot that 1/2, as I'm sure you know. To pivot that 1/2, the row operation we're going to perform, let me turn the light on and see if that helps, is we're going to multiply this first row by 2 to turn that into a 1. So 2 times row 1, making a new row 1 is our very first row operation, and that gives us this row here. Now, once we have that new row, let's go ahead and pivot with that 1 to kill the negative 1/2, the 1, and the negative 200. To kill the negative 1/2, I'm going to take 1/2 of my new row 1, add that to row 2 to make a new row 2. And of course what that gives us here is a 30, not a 28, and this is a 3/2, not a negative or positive 3, as they had apparently put there. Alright, to get rid of the 1, I'm simply going to take a negative of my new row 1 and add it to row 3 to make a new row 3. That gives us a 38 here. Looks, what did they have? A negative 26 and a negative 36 apparently. Those were way off. And we get a 3 here instead of the negative 6. Row 4 has a 0. We don't have to do anything to it, but for row 5 we have to get rid of the negative 200. So the row operation is 200 times row 1 plus row 5 to make a new row 5. My new row 5, therefore, is this. And we get the same 88,800 that apparently whoever wrote this problem on the software got, but of course these values are different, meaning that our solution could be different to the problem. Let's see what our solution is when we read the solution. Here's a pivot, so x2 is got a pivot, that's 4. x1 does not have a pivot, that's 0. x3 has a pivot, that's 6. And then our maximum value, 88,800. So what I think is they got the right answer in terms of the x values and the m value that we're trying to maximize or minimize, whatever that is, in the context of the problem. But somehow in the middle they screwed up the numbers, and since this correct answer came out, they didn't notice that they had screwed up their numbers. Okay? Alright, so keep up the good work, Amy. You're doing everything correctly, apparently, and let me know if you have any other questions.